Welcome to First Congregational Church here at our temporary home, Steeple Square. We are nomads at the moment, but we're so grateful to be here. I like to see all these familiar faces here today, some I haven't seen in a while, and some brand new faces. So welcome to church. As far as announcements, we have a whole plethora of them. If you didn't notice, there is a large book that you could have picked up when you came in. We will be having a meeting after church regarding the building and the search. We have American Lady Cruise coming up, which should be fun. I'm very excited about Theology on Tap, which is starting Wednesday at Dubuque. And the other thing to note is that we are now opening the youth room. So the youth room will be open for grades 6 through 12. But now, whatever burdens you may have carried as you entered into this building, sitting down into your seat, as you exhale, letting go of the week and the burdens that you brought here today. And as you inhale, taking this moment to bring in sanctuary, settling in to this time, in this place, and being in prayer with God. God of mercy and forgiveness, we confess that sin still has a hold on us. We have harmed your good creation. We have failed to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with you. Turn us in a new direction. Show us a path that leads to life. Be our refuge and strength on this journey. O divine teacher, you instruct your children to be responsible stewards of your creation. Show us how to best care for the earth and all of its resources, and guide those who work to develop sustainable practices. O God, you are the ruler of the nations. You direct those who are in authority. Give leaders wisdom and compassion so that all may live in peace. Inspire public servants to follow the example of courageous leaders. God, you are a helper of the needy. You lift up all who are oppressed. Breathe justice into systems that perpetuate poverty and hunger. Sustain food ministries, clothing banks, and emergency shelters. God, you are a sustainer and giver of life. You bless this congregation with abundance. We give thanks for the start of our fall programming year and for all the helpers at Rally Day, and we rejoice in the 58th wedding anniversary of Phil and Judy. Instruct us in proper and faithful use of wealth and resources here in our kickoff to our stewardship campaign. Help us to share generously. God of glory, you gather your saints all around you. Keep us thankful for the witness of those who have gone before us, and bring us with them to the heavenly feast that has no end. Gathered together in the sweet communion of the Holy Spirit, gracious God, we offer these and all our prayers to you through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Testing. Do I have any children who'd like to come up for the children's sermon? Hi, Sarah. Lillian, Musa, Imani. Lillian, are those some new shoes? They light up. Welcome. Hello, how are you? Good to see you again. Hello. That's right, wow. All right, so what the grown-ups and I are going to be talking about today is a story that actually really confused me. What would you think if, like, your brother took your allowance and, like, gave it away? Would you be like, that's all right, I forgive you? Or your sister? Would you like that? No. No. So this story is about, good thing you don't have a brother or sister. Yeah. What this story is about someone called a master, and a master would be like a boss, like he was like the owner of things. And he has this manager who is like someone who works for him, and this manager is doing bad things with his money. He's giving it all away. And so I actually have an example. Sarah, can you do that? What ends up happening, is the master gives the manager something we call grace. Who knows what grace is? Grace, you know what that is? It's like, kind of like, it's okay, you make a mistake, everyone makes mistakes, you're still loved. That's right, okay? So grace is like, okay, there's something in this cup, right? What would go in this cup? What would you expect to be in this cup? Coffee. Yeah, you'd expect coffee to be in this cup, right? And so grace is like, the coffee's supposed to be in the cup, but you knew it was those, is that coffee? No, grace is really unexpected. You used vision power. You knew it was those. Grace is unexpected. And it shows up in ways that we don't expect. When we expect it to be coffee, it's actually little bracelets. And when we expect it to stay in the cup, uh-oh, I spilled it onto the floor. But that's okay, because sometimes we make mistakes. But that doesn't matter because we are what? We're always loved. And that's what God's grace means. If you would like a bracelet, you may have a bracelet. Yeah. Should we say a prayer? We're going to do the one where you repeat after me, okay? Dear God, thank you for loving us in unexpected ways. Maybe even when we don't think we deserve it. Help us to show that love to everyone we meet. All right. Bye-bye. There he is. Come on up, Steve.
I want you to think with me for a moment this morning. The first time you came to worship here at Steeple Square, for me it was kind of an odd feeling that I was visiting a church, wondering what worship will be like. But of course, once inside, I realized I was at my church, our church, regardless of where we happen to be meeting. But this is a very interesting time for our church. And it's important to acknowledge that we are facing some challenges. There's the structural challenges in our church home. There's the challenge of finding the right person to join us as our senior minister. And these challenges are significant. But as we face these challenges, I find reasons to be thankful. I am thankful that there are those among us with the experience, expertise, and knowledge to guide us through successful conclusion of these challenges. I'm thankful for the skills and dedication of our staff and volunteers as they continue to plan worship and music and programming as we face these challenges. And I'm thankful that in the face of these challenges, we are still the church with a heart in the heart of the city as we continue to find ways to serve our neighbors and our community. We have been blessed. And most importantly, I am thankful that even though our north wall is weak, we are strong. So here we are in a stewardship moment, an opportunity to reflect on how God has blessed our church and our lives, and a time to consider how through service and sharing we can express gratitude for these blessings. And in this way, each of us can find and experience our own personal stewardship moments.
The parable of the Shrewd manager is unique to the Gospel of Luke. We've been journeying through the Gospel of Luke in our lectionary text during this season, year C. And this parable, in my humble opinion, is one of the craziest stories of the Bible. I have been wrestling with this beast all week long with this parable. And I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm going to be very forthright, and I hope you will give me grace. I am still really not sure what to do with it. Apparently I'm not alone. When I started researching this parable and looking into all the commentaries and the things that you do when you're trying to figure out what you're going to say on Sunday, everybody's all over the place with this one. The biblical scholars are here, there, and everywhere, but there is one thing that they can agree on, and that this is a tough one. This is a tough one. I'm going to give you a few of their opinions about what we should make of it, just to guide you in your listening and reading. One of the themes I encountered would be kind of like the children's sermon. It's about radical grace or radical mercy from the master to his manager. Another thing would be that we have these really big radical decisions to make in light of the kingdom of God coming. Another one is that preparation, even if it's dishonest preparation, is better than no preparation at all. Fine, okay. All really valid ways of looking at this. As I was reading this text over and over and over again, I had some questions that came up, and I'm going to present them to you right now. Maybe you'll be thinking them also. One of the questions I had was, why is the rich man commending his manager for being dishonest? Why in the world is Jesus offering us, his followers, such a terrible protagonist as a role model? How exactly are the children of light, that's you and I, supposed to take a cue from the shrewdness of the self-interested man? Are we missing something, or does this parable in fact seem to contradict everything else Jesus is saying in the Bible? And what in the world is going on in the end with all the convoluted platitudes and glosses, all the words that follow this parable? Last week, we talked about a different parable, and I told you that a parable was a short story that was probably meant to confuse us and get us thinking more than they were meant to teach us a moral or an easy morality tale where you can just easily pull the moral out of the story. They're meant to propel us into a new way of life and a new way of living by thinking and wrestling and searching. Now, my friends, this parable, more than any other parable I can remember that I've preached to date, embodies the definition of that. So maybe that's the ultimate point. So let's listen together. Let's enter in and start wrestling.
What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. Then the manager said to himself,
What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to debt, and I'm ashamed back. I have decided what to do, so that I'm dismissed as manager. People may welcome me into their homes.
So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first,
How much do you owe my master?
He answered,
100 jugs of olive oil.
He said to him,
Take your bill and sit down quickly and make it iffy.
Then he asked another,
And how much do you owe?
You reply,
100 containers of wheat.
He said to him, commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes.
Whoever is faithful in a very little faithful, also in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest, also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you the true riches.
And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth.
What'd you think of that? Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky text. I'm going to tell you something about my experiences here with this. So the first few times I read through the text, I made the assumption that what the manager did that was dishonest was because of the actions that we see happening right here in the parable. It's that he lowered the amount that each debtor owed the master. Here's the thing though. You always have to take the Bible, the stories in the Bible, and the Bible in the cultural context in which it was written. All right? So, that was my mistake. I was viewing it through my own cultural lens. So, what you're going to get now is that buckle up your seatbelts. We're going to get a history lesson. So, we're going to talk about our culture. The culture that you and I live in today. An employee, like the manager, would keep track of the money owed to his employer, which would be the master, right? And in return, the employer, or the master, would pay the manager a salary, or a living wage, right? So, if a manager were to be, reducing the costs of inventory, say at Target, or just lowering the sticker price on their own, they would get in really big trouble, right? They would end up probably maybe in jail, if not for sure, fired. So that's what happens when I was looking at this initially through my own lens. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This makes no sense at all. I don't get it. But if you look at this through the lens of what was going on back in Palestine, centuries and centuries ago during the time that Jesus lived, things are really different. The situation between masters, managers, and debtors was a much more complex one. The master wanted to get as much money as possible from his debtors, which would have been merchants and tenants. And the manager, the main character in our story, would have been the middleman between the master and the debtors, right? So he would be going to the debtors to collect the money to give the master. The difference here is that the manager was not given a wage. The master did not pay the manager as we would expect in our day and age. Instead, the manager made his money by adding fees on to the master's bills. So I'm going to give you an example. Say the tenant, his bill is for $10, right? He owes the master $10. The manager is going to come and present the debtor with a $15 bill, take the $10, give it to the master, pocket the $5. That's how he lives. This was expected. This was expected at the time. The master didn't mind if the manager did this, as long as he was getting his profit, and as long as the manager wasn't doing things to make him look completely ridiculous or mishandling things in any way, as long as it wasn't too obvious, right? The other thing is that the debtors, the merchants, and the people who were paying the master didn't know who was getting what cut of the bill. As far as they were seeing, all of that money was going to the master. They didn't know how much the manager was taking. Only the manager knew that. So, while my initial assumption was that the manager was being honest because he was reducing these debts owed, I'm not sure that that's really the case now, knowing the history. It seems like he was being called dishonest because of what happened before our story today. That he was being called dishonest because he squandered, the text says he squandered that money. He mishandled it. And we don't know exactly how that might have been done. We're not given a really clear-cut answer on how he mismanaged the money. However, you can make an assumption, and that it is just that, an assumption based on the text and how this parable plays out, by what he might have been doing is putting an extraordinary high amount of money on the bills for him to pocket and take away and take home. Going back to that example, the tenant owes $10. The manager may have been doing something like putting $20 on top of that. He pockets 20, the master gets 10, something like that. This benefits the manager significantly. However, it doesn't benefit the debtors, and it doesn't make the master look very good either, because they're being presented with this really high bill. Like, what the heck? Who is this guy? So, if this were the case, he would be making an extraordinary gain at both the expense of his master and the debtors. Looking closely at this character of the manager, our protagonist in our story today, his position in society would have been both a privileged one and a vulnerable one. He would have had a high standard of living. He would have been able to read and write. However, he was also completely dependent on his master, and you see some of that in the text when he learns he's going to be fired. Sometimes people see that as whining, but I think it can also be seen, all of his words seen as more like desperation. I see it as panic. He doesn't harbor any illusions about himself or who he is. He knows himself well. He knows he's not strong enough to dig. He knows he's too ashamed to beg. So he focuses instead on redeeming what he can about the situation he finds himself in. It's a situation he got himself into, frankly, right? So I think what he's probably doing in this parable, probably what's happening, is he's reducing or completely eliminating his own take-home pay. He's the one losing money. So, that $15 scenario that I told you about, he might be taking that $5, getting rid of it completely, or maybe only taking home one. My guess is probably getting rid of it completely, because this man is worried about living in poverty. He's looking for good favor for after he gets fired. He's the only one losing money here, but in the long run, he's doing it for his own survival. Now I'm going to call Nikki out. She's back there. When we were working on this, when we were working on our email to send out to the congregation, I was still hemming and hawing and not sure what I was going to do about this. And she said, Katie, what are we going to title this? Are we going to title this the dishonest manager or the shrewd manager? I was like, I don't know. Like, decided on shrewd. And he's like, I like shrewd better. And so that's what we went with. And I'm really glad we did. Because, come to think of it, his actions in this parable, after you know the background, are not very dishonest. They are more shrewd. He's not only looking out for his best interest, but his actions are going to please the debtors, who now owe the master less money, and his actions are going to please the master, who is taking home the same amount of money, but now he has the goodwill of his debtors because of this manager's shrewdness. So he is pleased with him, and he gets to keep his job. So there's your history lesson. I'm sure you're all taking notes. be a quiz at the end? No. All right, it's helpful for us to understand the parable, right? Knowing all that history. But what relevance does that actually have for us today? That's the next thing. What do we make of all this? There are two things that stand out for me. Number one is the need to take shrewd and decisive action. Number two would be the responsibility of wealth. We're going to talk about shrewdness. The idea of being shrewd tends to have negative connotations. It did for me before I started looking into it. But in all actuality, shrewdness is not necessarily a bad thing. The definition of it is to have a sharp power of resourcefulness. It means to have wisdom, to be able to see into the future, to have far-sightedness. Shrewd people tend to be pragmatists. They understand how people work and how the world works here and now. These are the opposite kind of people from me, to be honest. I tend to be one of those optimist, pie-in-the-sky people, and I lament and how I want things to be, rather than actually being able to see the way things are. Someone who's shrewd doesn't. They're able to see things realistically. Taking shrewd, decisive action is something that we all should work towards. It's something that I'm working towards. And it begins with actually really looking at the situation and how that might project into the future, right? When the manager is in trouble, he springs into action. This is something I really admire about him. When I'm in trouble, I tend to freeze, I tend to wallow, I tend to feel sorry for myself, I tend to feel sad about the way I want things to be or the way things could have been. Not this guy. He doesn't wallow in self-pity. He doesn't wait around despairing. He puts it out the door with a plan in hand and he is ready. And I think it might be that sense of urgency he had, that smart, creative possibilities and cleverness that he came up with. Maybe that's the thing that we need to look at here. It says in our text today, the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I wonder if that means we can do a better job of engaging in crisis and issues, injustices, losses, failures facing our world today. Things facing our church today. I just read a study from NPR that's saying that Christianity is making a sharp decline right now. What ways are we failing to meet the challenges of our time and place head on, with shrewdness, with creativity, with a sense of urgency? Where and how might we be more shrewd, more clever, more creative in our vocations and our calling to God? In our vocations as children of light. This parable upholds shrewdness, but I want to take a step back and look at this in the larger text of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, which places a lot of emphasis on God's mercy, Jesus' concern for the poor, and that whole thing where fortunes are reversed, where everything is turned upside down on its head. A prominent theme that we find in Luke is also the proper use of wealth, and that's going to lead me to my second point. But I don't think it's just about the proper use of wealth. I think it might be more about our relationship to wealth and how that impacts our relationship with others. As I mentioned earlier, while the manager was acting in a dishonest way to enrich himself, he changed then. He changed and acted in a way to enrich others, thereby establishing a positive relationship where everyone benefits. And is it using money to establish relationships better than hoarding money? Maybe that's what we're supposed to be thinking about. Or maybe that's what we're supposed to be talking about money. Oof. It's really hard to talk about money. It's pretty taboo, actually, in our society. It's not something I like to talk about or deal with. I would rather it just work itself out. I struggle with it, and I'm going to guess that I'm not alone based on all of the applications I can find on my phone on how to manage my money and all the stuff out there about how to deal with money. Money is one of the leading causes of difficulties in marriages and relationships. It's a tricky thing. I have a lot of questions about it. How much money is too much money? How much money is not enough money? I want more, but do I actually need more? How much should I be giving away? What is a fair salary for me? What is a fair salary for my neighbor? How can I raise children who are both wise, I don't want them to have trouble with money, but at the same time, very generous? And I'm not saying that this parable is going to give us a clear answer or guidance on those topics. It's one of the reasons it's kind of frustrating. But what it does do is it gets us thinking, and it gets us talking about money. It also presents us with characters who struggle with money, characters with mixed motives about money, and characters who change and grow, characters who might be a little or a lot like us. I don't think it's possible to draw a neat moral out of this story. Nothing's straightforward. The master's not straightforwardly like God. The manager's not straightforwardly like us. These are conclusions that I'm speaking about this morning. These conclusions are mere possibilities. They're my attempts to wrap my head around this parable. One of the trickiest of all of Jesus' parables, in my opinion. If nothing else, this parable might be a good reminder to us to tread lightly when it comes to the stories that Jesus told us. Approach the stories humbly. Leave space in your heart for mystery, for wonder, for some confusion, for some uncertainty. Never assume that you have all the answers. And as it is with Jesus, we're always given an overabundance of truth, an overabundance of meaning, an overabundance of love and grace rather than a lack of it. But the thing is, we know our path. Our path is to live in the light and be a light for a world that needs more grace, mercy, peace, and freedom. And maybe, just maybe, this parable is teaching us that we should walk in the footsteps of Jesus a little bit more creatively, a little bit more urgently, and a little bit more, get this, shrewdly. And that's good news. Amen. Lord look upon you with kindness and give you peace. Now go in peace and shrewdly serve the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. If you need a printed copy of the report, raise your hand, and Nikki will give it to you.
I do not have to go. Travis is not. I'm afraid now.
Let's go ahead and grab your seats and I'll get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Merle Sanger, Chair of the Trustees. And my objective today is to provide an update of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So in March of 2022, the trustees contracted with WJE to give us some guidance and direction. In their proposal, they talked about 3 stages of this plan. Stage 1 was investigation, and that's the report that has been provided to all of you. Stage 2 would have been, or will be, to develop repair documents, and then ultimately stage 3 would be construction. So in the 43 pages of the report, if you really want the condensed version, you would go to page 41, 42, and 43. My intent is not to read the entire recommendations, but I think I would highlight a couple of things. The North Masonry wall and organ chamber sidewall assemblies of the FCC church building are in a weakened condition. We recommend that these masonry walls be repaired to correct distressed conditions, restore compromised lateral bracing, and to address vulnerabilities to the weather. In addition, the timber roof trusses have been localized connection failures and vulnerabilities within the existing truss assemblies that need strengthening, measures to address calculated overstress conditions experienced with the variations of wall stiffness. Repairs are recommended to improve the masonry durability and stiffness of the truss assemblies, to reduce the anticipated lateral forces of the masonry walls, and enable the structure to safely support prescribed loads. So in summary, what the report really talks about is new shoring needs to be installed for stabilization and work platforms, phase selective reconstruction of the failed masonry, concealed steel reinforcing to tie all sections of that north wall together, new lintels at ductwork openings and failed timber lintels, and then steel reinforcing the timber trusses. And again, the design solution is concealed and prevents the use of visual tension rods in the sanctuary. So if we were to go back, and the first words I remember when we were dealing with a local engineering firm, the word complete deconstruction of the north wall was being talked about. That is not a part of the plan. These folks have a solution to fix that wall. It may be a little bit cumbersome at times, but basically step 1 is to provide stabilization and shoring all the way down to the kitchen level, and then work our way up to provide additional support for everything above it. There is a lot of weight in that north wall, and that's assuming we took the organ out and we took the windows out, which in hindsight was a wonderful thing to do and the right thing to do. So where do we go from here? Hopefully by the end of September, WJE will have all of the shoring drawings completed, and those will be in the hands of Gronin. Gronin has already reached out to subcontractors and contractors that we think might be interested and capable of doing the repairs. The trustees' message to Gronin is let's do everything we can to speed up, expedite, and they're on the same page in the Bible that we are. Lord willing, October, November, we would have time to install all of the shoring pieces. The plan of the trustees then would be, when that is complete, determine whether use of the social room is an option. That's all going to be determined by the work that needs to be done and the work that needs to be done above all of the shoring area. So again, we're in stage 2. Stage 2 again would be getting all of the documents in place, ultimately leading to, here's the work that needs to be done. There would then be a price associated with that work, and then there would be a bidding process. Trustees are very concerned about selection of who does the work. This is a old historic church, and if any of the work that is being completed is done, we need to make sure that it is done correctly so that we can apply for the historic tax credits that would be a part of paying for a good part of the total cost. Trustees have also had discussion that in addition to the repair of the north wall, while we're doing it, let's look at these other items. And these are in no set order. Obviously, we know that the kitchen steps that were damaged within the last year or two, that needs to be repaired. We need a closer look at our current HVAC system. It is past the warranty stage, and from an efficiency standpoint, there would be much better options for us to look at. Carpet, painting, all of that is being looked at the same time. Again, many, many thanks to Nikki and Kaity for their time involved, to the trustees, to those members of the church that stepped to the plate to help put together for WJE the past history. WJE has said many a time, we work with a lot of churches and museums, and nobody has documentation back to the 1950s like we do. Ultimately, we already have work being done on a capital campaign. Until we know the exact cost, we will not be able to determine the timing of that capital campaign. But if I were guiding, it would be early in 2023 when all of this comes together. Again, the report is pretty massive, but if you're into the history of the church and some of the things that have gone on in the past that have led us to where we are, it's a pretty neat put together, and we compliment WJE on the thoroughness of what they've done for us. I would be open to any questions of any kind. Again, our plan as trustees is to be at least monthly, giving you updates. For those in the crowd that will be heading south, we'll keep you updated no matter where you are. So again, thanks for your time and attention, and I will turn it over to Travis.
I do not have a 50-page report for you from the search committee. We do have an update though. Our profile has been out there for candidates for about a month and a half now. And right now we have 2 candidates, 2 applicants in. This is not as many applicants as we were hoping to have at this point in the process, but they are 2 viable candidates. And we've had, Mary and I have had some conversations with the conference the last week and a half or so, kind of just feeling out the general situation. The conference says that we are certainly not unique in having recruitment problems, difficult finding people right now. That all of the churches searching in our conference are having problems getting a number of candidates. But they also said that they were going to start doing some more reaching out on our behalf, and we did a little revision to the opening paragraph that candidates see when they look at our profile. and we highlighted one, the strength of our compensation package, and two, the relative urbanness and diversity of Dubuque compared to other parts of Iowa. As kind of making that a little more clear in that first paragraph people will see. So we're hoping that we can get another few candidates. In the meantime, we're kind of philosophically, we're kind of between two ideas. On the one hand, we don't want to rush this process. We don't want to kind of force a decision before we have the right people. On the other hand, we don't want to lose viable candidates that we have. And so what the search committee is going to do is we're going to start discussing the candidates we have a week from Monday. Kind of have an initial, we have a rubric together. Mary put together a wonderful rubric for kind of looking at all this stuff. We're going to start that discussion. We'll see where those discussions go, but we'll kind of at least start the process so that of this consideration of candidates. Hopefully, even by then, we'll get another candidate or two, and we'll see where we go from there. What you can do in the meantime is, number one, continue to have patience. We're doing what we can, and we want to take the appropriate amount of time with this to get the decision right. And then two, pray that the right people find us. That there's the right person out there, as kind of what people said throughout, there's a right person out there who's coming to us. And just pray that we make sure that that person does find us and we make that connection. So again, where we're at right now, we have two candidates in. We've done some revision to try to get some more, but the search committee is going to start discussing those candidates a week from Monday. That's all I got. Any questions? Okay, well, feel free to grab me, Mary, or another search committee if you have any kind of thoughts that you want to pass on one-on-one. Otherwise, have a wonderful Sunday and do some heavy reading with this thing.